Hello everyone, I am Jonathan Little for PokerNews.com. Today we have a hand from the $10,000 buy-in World Series of Poker main event that I played a while back. Here we have a player in the low jack raising to 400, player in the cutoff calls. What should we do with our pocket sixes? There's only one good option. Take a second, think about it. It is to call. You want to call with your small pairs because when you flop a set, they are almost always the best hand, and they basically always get to see the river and or showdown because if you don't have the best hand, you probably have the best draw to a full house. So these hands are fantastic. You want to put in a small amount of money now for the chance to win a large amount of money when you do make a set. When you don't make a set, it's okay to fold. I once had someone tell me they always fold the small pairs because they're probably behind at the moment when someone raises and someone calls. But they did not realize, for some reason, that you are putting in very little for the chance to win a lot. This was referred to as implied odds. If implied odds are unfamiliar to you, I have a free course for you. Check it out right now, pokercoaching.com/fundamentals. If you have any friends who want to learn poker or who are especially bad, send them to pokercoaching.com/fundamentals and that will get them in playing shape. All right, here we have the pocket sixes. We're going to call. We're going to see the flop. And we get 3 sixes. Sometimes bad, but this time it's good. So they check around to me, which is a bit of a bummer because when it goes check, 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 it's highly likely they're just all going to fold. However, you do want to make a reasonably large bet in this scenario. If we are against a king is going to never fold. If we're against a flush draw is going to never fold. And if we're against a hand like ace, queen of hearts, that could very easily just decide to float. So I definitely like betting something like 1,200 in this scenario. That is what we do. If you can just look around the table and see that everybody's folding, like they're done, it's obvious, which sometimes could be the case in the World Series main event. A lot of people will be really into a hand when they know they're not folding, and then when they're out of it, because they have whatever, queen, jack of diamonds, they're like, don't care about this anymore. If that's what they're doing, then you should probably just check behind because they're all just going to fold if you bet. But if everyone's playing reasonably, they seem to be decent poker players, you want to go ahead and make a bet in this scenario with your best hands, probably something like king, jack, and better, and then also your draws. So that is what we do. Only a straightforward player in the cutoff calls. Turns the queen of clubs. Straightforward player checks again. And now I think we can pretty easily go for a turn bet because we have the best hand the vast majority of the time. Now, you may say, couldn't the opponent have a flush? Sure, they could. If they do, hopefully they don't raise too big. This is a spot where if our opponent does have a king, they are almost certainly going to continue calling. If they did float with a queen, like queen, jack of hearts, ace, queen of hearts, they are almost certainly going to continue calling as well. You don't need to go too big in this scenario because while any hand with a club is getting the right priced out draws, notice that the range we're trying to get called by is very, very weak. Our main concern here is not getting protection from the random hands with a club because in order to bet big enough to price those hands out, we'd have to bet, 3,500, something like that to make sure they're not getting great immediate plus implied odds. The problem is when we bet that big, a lot of the worst made hands are going to fold, perhaps all of them. And you don't want to be betting huge when that's going to force your opponent to react very, very well. You want to make sure your opponents are making mistakes. And the way you get your opponent to make a mistake in this scenario is by betting using a relatively small size and then just hoping they stick around with hands that are drawing pretty thin. If the river is a club, we'll let it go check, check. And sometimes we win with our 6 of clubs. If the river's not a club, we'll probably go for another small value bet. It's very important to make sure when you're playing against players who, probably play fine enough, but certainly aren't great. You want to make sure you are thinking about what their range very likely is and then choosing bet sizes that will accomplish what you want to accomplish. Now, if you're playing against a world-class professional, perhaps instead we would use a bigger size because we should expect them to call with a bit wide of a range in the spot. Because if they're going to fold out a king, then clearly they're just folding way too often. Good players are not going to fold out a king or a queen or even like pocket sevens with a 7 of clubs to a 3,000 bet. So we can bet bigger against them. But against the straightforward players, we should probably just go for a smaller size because they are usually going to become very afraid if we start using bigger bet sizes on the turn. So I do bet 1,500, and now, oh my goodness, the opponent raises to 3,500. This is a straightforward player. What should we do? This is brutal. So now, when the opponent raises, you have to think their range contains a whole lot of flushes, and maybe hands like King Queen or King Jack with a King of Clubs, King 10 with a 10 of Clubs, stuff like that. It's tough to know. This is one of these spots where the opponent's range literally could be all flushes. If it is all flushes, I think we have a very easy call because we're getting very good odds to outdraw our opponent. Notice we have to put in 2,000 into a pot that's going to be 11,000. So will we make the best hand by the river, call it a fifth of the time, plus we have some implied odds? Yeah, we're fine, right? Every once in a while, our opponent is also bluffing, well, / overvaluing with a hand like King Jack, and we actually have the best hand. So given we are going to improve on the river whenever we catch a full house, and we could have the best hand, I think this is a spot where we have a very easy call. We do not want to re-raise. You may say, why not re-raise to find out where you stand? Problem with re-raising is that if we're beat, well, we're going to learn where we stand, and we're going to end up investing a lot of chips. And if we do have the best hand, our opponent's just going to fold and not lose any more money. I mean, I guess you could say we could click it back to 6,500 or something like that, or 5,500 even, and maybe that gets perfectly accurate information. The problem, though, is that in exchange for perfectly accurate information, we're not going to be able to extract value from a king on the river if that is what our opponent has, and sometimes we're going to get blown off of our hand. By calling, we just always get to see the river and see if we improve to the full house, because if we get a full house, we're pretty happy. Now, to be fair, if the river is a king or a queen and the opponent bets big again, we have to be very careful because we could actually be against king-queen, right? So this is definitely a dicey scenario, but 2,000 into 11, sign me up. River is the 8 of hearts. Opponent now goes small. That's weird. 2,800 into the 11,000 pot. I don't think we have any option here besides to call. I certainly don't like this scenario at all, but I think it's going to be decent enough to call, because usually when opponents make small bets like this, they usually have a very marginal hand. The problem, though, is that they made their hand look really strong on the turn, right? So when they make their hand look really strong on the turn, you have to think their range is a lot of flushes. Like I said, it could be overvaluing. The opponent could just have King Jack. Whenever you have a hand that beats all the bluffs and perhaps some hands that your opponent is overvaluing, you really just cannot fold. So, like, I would not be the least bit shocked if my opponent turns up some flush here, like the ace-high flush or weaker flushes. But I also would not be shocked if they turn up King Jack that they just don't know how to play properly. So, yeah, you don't love calling in this spot, but I think it is a call. And this time, the opponent showed up with the 5-2 of clubs. Well, they got me. Surprised they didn't just bet the flop with the 5-2 of clubs. I mean, I guess I'm not that surprised because, you know, they played the 5-2 of clubs to begin with, so who knows what they're doing. But this is a spot where with that draw on the flop, you usually see people just bet it. If our opponent did bet the flop, it would have raised, they would have called, it would have gone check on the turn most likely, it would have called a river bet. Lose roughly the same. You always want to ask, like, how could this hand have played out differently, and would that have been better for me, assuming the opponent's whole range? And you also want to look at your opponent's play as instructional content as well, potentially instructional content at least. So anyway, in this scenario, could we have folded the river? I don't really think so. Against an unknown player, it's important that you do not make giant exploitative plays without a good reason. And folding on the river when you're getting very good pot odds, I mean, look, we only need to be good 20% of the time in this scenario. We're going to be good 20% of the time. We're probably good like 30 or 40% of the time in reality. Now, I understand against some specific opponents, we're good 0%. But against some other opponents, we're good like 70%. So you average all of that out, probably goes up to 30, 40, 50%, somewhere in there, to the point that we just cannot fold this hand. So that's going to be it for today. We made a set, we lost, but that is okay. Notice we did not raise and re-raise and blast our money in when we were dead. Instead, we realized, all right, opponent took a strong line. Let's be very cautious. And we didn't really lose a whole lot of money, so we have to be happy with that. Hope you enjoyed this hand. If you did, give me a like, click subscribe, I would appreciate it. Good luck in your games, have fun, and I'll talk to you next time.